This is a compilation video of Quickies that were once uploaded to my main channel. I moved them off there since they were cluttering the place up between my main videos. While I have divided each of them up based on anime season, there may be some things from other anime seasons mixed in there, as I may have watched things that were from a prior season during that one. You will find timestamps for each anime talked about in each of these compilations in the description. Thank you. Anime dropped this year, number 17. Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World. 2 out of 10. Okay, damn, this one's, wow. I have said many times on my page that I do not think that all fan service is bad, and this is one of the cases where I will not knock the show for it in any way. This show is basically softcore, adults-only material, and it knows that. It's not trying to be coy about it. It's the entire point. So yeah, I am not gonna come down on it with my fan service annoyance hammer. It's definitely not my kind of thing in general though, so that combined with it being a pretty generic isekai meant that I figured out pretty early this was not going to be for me. It was just going to be one of the shows that I set aside because it's not my kind of a deal. But I am committed to seeing at least one full episode of every show that premieres through, so I watched the whole first episode, and wow. So, our main character's first big goal, as established by the end of the first episode, is buying a sex slave. They're not shy about it at all, and it's really, really gross. For the characters, this isn't just some fun, sexy whatever like the viewers. This is their real life. So the fact that I'm expected to believe a guy from the modern day with a modern worldview would come rolling in and be fine with it after being talked into it for 5 minutes is already a stretch. However, the show needs me to be okay with being our main character's goal for a bit, and be fine with this guy being our main character. That's just not going to happen. Some people, this isn't going to bother them, but for me, this is something that I cannot get past. And by the way, if I don't buy her, someone else will is not a justification. Not when, even before that, our main character was very carefully going out of his way to make sure there were no loopholes to the slave ownership thing. It's also really weird that her seller stresses the fact that she has given her consent to sleep with whoever buys her. And I know it's just a throwaway line to make it not SA so the viewer doesn't have to feel bad or gross about it, but consent is something that can be revoked at any time, and she is not the one currently giving it in that moment. He could so easily be lying about that. The entire thing is just so sketchy and gross, and I hated it. I understand that some people are going to like this and it's going to be just dumb, sexy fun for them, and if that's you, that's fine. Go have your fun. But for me, I found this show really gross and off-putting, and I'm not going to be watching it. Anime dropped this year, number 18, Vermeil in Gold. 1 episode watched, 4 out of 10. Okay, second show of the season that I am not coming out swinging right away with my annoyance at the overuse of fan service. This is a sex comedy, so it makes sense that fan service is going to be pretty heavy in it. Do I want to get panty shots out of nowhere? No, not really, but this is once again one of those cases where the sex jokes and the horniness of it are the whole point of the show, so there's really not any reason to get worked up about it. It's just one of those things that just isn't for me is all, since shows of this nature very, very rarely are able to hold my interest. If you want a real plot, this isn't gonna be the show for that, and that's okay. However, I think the production values are severely lacking here. I may be a straight woman, but I'm capable of telling when a female figure is being depicted in a sexy or attractive way. And I just don't think that this one holds up to the standard a lot of people are looking for. It's horny, sure, and Vermeil's confidence is very attractive, but at the same time, the camera angles on display here are pretty bad, and the anatomy is too. In particular, the faces have a tendency to look pretty bad because they're hoping that big booba is enough to distract you from those finer details. I also don't expect that we're going to get a lot of lovingly animated scenes either. This show has a lot of panning shots that go very slowly. I went back and rewatched some of the scenes on 1.5 speed, and they still felt slow then, so that should give you an idea of just how long these slow holds are. Like I said, this is just not a show for me is all, but I think that even if you were looking for something with sexy anime ladies to watch, you have better options out there. All this one really gives you that some other shows might not is the specific of having a very confident succubus. However, the show radiates a sense of cheapness that makes it feel distinctly unsexy. Anime dropped this year, number 19, Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. One episode watched, 4 out of 10. Okay, I'm in a bit of a weird place with this one. I'm not dropping this show because I am not interested in it. I'm actually fairly interested in where this plot may be going, and while I don't find the male main character all that interesting, our female lead here has gotten my attention. I've heard no shortage of good things from fans about how this manga is worth reading, and I can see why they like it from this first episode alone. I'm actually interested in giving this a read, but I am not interested in watching this show going forward. Look, I'm not a huge animation snob, at least I don't think I am. I'm someone where a good story can carry me through some lower production values if it really gets me invested. For example, Ascendance of a Bookworm isn't exactly the prettiest girl at the party, but it's still one of my favorites. However, that's just not going to be the case with this show. From the reactions that people are having, it seems like they really massacred a favorite here. Death by low budget, because the manga ended over a decade ago, so the producers really don't care all that much about this one. The opening? Still frames of character promo art against a generic spacey background and clips from the show under a filter of the same background. It's mostly a slideshow. The animation in this show runs pretty low frame rates as well, and if they can get away with holding on a still image, they do it. Maybe with a little hair or clothing fluttering that can be looped if we're lucky. I am interested in this one, but for me, it seems like they've done the source material pretty dirty in this case, so I'm not going to bother keeping up with the anime, and I'll just read the manga instead. Perhaps that's the one big thing this one did. It got someone like me who hadn't read the manga to go and do so. Anime dropped this year, number 20. My Stepmom's Daughter is My Ex. 5 out of 10. In case you are wondering the reason why that title is so convoluted, as far as I understand it, most of the sibling-related words in Japanese inherently specify younger or older sibling. They have an argument in the first episode about neither of them wanting to be the younger sibling because they were born on the same day 30 minutes apart, so Stepmom's Daughter gets around the whole younger-older thing. That being said, this just feels like it's a pretty standard shonen romance series like Aharen-san and Shikimori last season. There's just nothing about it that's grabbing me is all. The hook is funny, sure, but let's not kid ourselves. It's very similar to Domestic Girlfriend from a few years ago. The first episode set up that there was going to be some sort of mind games about trying to trick the other into acting not like a sibling, so it's trying to mix a little Kaguya Love is War into there as well. However, the mind games that have been displayed aren't as funny or intricate as those of Kaguya and lack the stellar animation direction that really took those to the next level. Let's be clear, I don't necessarily have a problem with the reuse of tropes or ideas in shows. With how many damn anime and manga come out every year, things are going to get reused after all. The ones that use them the best are just going to rise to the top much faster. In this case, I don't feel like anything new or interesting is being done with the ones here, so it gives off this feeling of, oh, I've seen this all before. There's nothing bad about that or anything like that, I'm just finding it bland. And that's before we get into how this is very much making an appeal to those who are really into the, what are you doing, stepbro situations. It's got a weird vibe of wanting to have a sibling complex kink, but also making sure that we know that they're super totally not related, so it's okay if they actually get together. The way that both of them get when they have to call each other big brother or big sister makes that so clear. Unfortunately, sibling complex is one of those things that tends to put me off a series personally because I just kind of find it gross and uncomfortable. It's the reason that Spy Family was a 9 instead of a 10 for me, for example. I don't really have an issue with the setup of this one, or even the idea of a rekindling of the relationship coming from that setup, but playing really hard into the sibling angle while doing it just pushes me away from a show that I was already kind of meh on. Anime dropped this year, number 21, Teppen Laugh Until You Cry, also known as Teppen with 15 exclamation points. 2 episodes watched, though the second episode I watched was actually the third episode. 5 out of 10. While I have not enjoyed the show and would normally give it a lower score based on how much I have enjoyed it, I'm rating it at this level because I understand that the reasons I'm not enjoying it are not entirely the show's fault. This show is about manzai comedy, which is a form of comedy that is pretty culturally specific to Japan. Thus, I don't really have a frame of reference to properly appreciate it. Not only that, it's a form of comedy that, as far as I understand it, makes heavy use of wordplay and puns, a form of comedy that is exceptionally difficult to translate without it coming off awkwardly. This was kind of the perfect storm for it to not work for English-speaking audiences. Comedy is also one of the most subjective things in the world, so it's going to be very hit or miss with every person, and this just doesn't hit for me, and it seems I'm not the only one. However, that also means that you shouldn't just take my word for it and should make sure to see for yourself. This is very much a, if we make it wackier, that makes it funnier, right? Kind of a show. Things get quickly too exaggerated for my tastes. This one also has a big problem with introducing too many characters all in the first episode. 5 teams of 3 comedians each makes for 15 cute girls that are introduced, plus their dorm manager. This isn't helped by the fact that the second episode never aired, so the third episode is focused on characters other than our mains, seemingly out of nowhere. And there's a clear gap of something missing, as the dynamics between the groups have somewhat changed in what I presume would be the events of the second episode. Yeah, this anime actually has an episode that is now officially considered lost media. It's one of those cases where an anime scripting team accidentally predicted the future again. Yeah, again, this isn't the first time that's happened with an anime, crazily enough. But the events of the episode had enough vague similarities to the whole Shinzo Abe thing that they're playing it safe, and I don't blame them at all for that. It's just really unfortunate. Gotta say, though, that I wasn't expecting that out of the silly comedy girl anime, but it is disappointing that that whole lost media thing is probably what I'm going to most remember about this series. Anime dropped this year, number 22. Shoot, Goal to the Future. 1 episode watched, 4 out of 10. So I wasn't sure at first what this was, sequel or reboot or what exactly. Looking into it, it is an anime original next generation sequel to a 90s soccer anime and manga. However, given that it's coming out all these years later, I have to assume we're meant to be able to watch it as a standalone, with any reference to the earlier series being one of those things that's just a little treat for older fans of the original. In some ways, this does feel like an older sports series. It comes with all the good and the bad that comes with that. The good coming in the fact that it feels almost a little nostalgic, like something that someone my age would have watched as a kid. But the bad being that it has some of the most melodrama that I have seen in a sports anime in a long time. Everything requires the biggest possible emotions and is done for the most ridiculous reasons. Everyone is coming into every situation as hot as they can. For some people, that's not going to be a problem for them at all, and some might even like that. Heck, I can get into a good melodrama now and then, but this one's just not working for me at all. None of the characters feel very grounded. Granted, anime characters are often over the top and kind of ridiculous, but these ones feel particularly so. What's worse is that this show has the misfortune of airing during the second core of Aoashi. I dropped that show as well because I wasn't really clicking with it, but even with that, I can still tell that that is the superior soccer show to be watching right now if you're wanting a soccer anime. Anime dropped this year, number 23. My Isekai Life, I gained a second character class and became the strongest sage in the world. 2 episodes watched, 3 out of 10. What can I even say about this one? This is perhaps one of the most painfully generic isekais that I have ever seen. Look, I am no big fan of the modern incarnation of isekai, but one thing I can usually say is that the main character has a personality of some sort. This guy doesn't even have that. He's just blah. I've also said before that I don't have an interest in shows about overpowered characters. I just find it so boring and uninteresting when that's our starting point. If a character is going to be overpowered, I want to see the build up to that. I want to see what it took. Starting overpowered is uninteresting to me. So if you're going to do that, there has to be something else that's really exceptional about the series. In this case, the explanation for the overpowered nature of our character is so weak. And then the show goes, that was a week ago. From the first episode of the show, I was willing to see this guy as an established person who had been living there for a few months in order to give it the benefit of doubt. But no, he's just speed running it like every other overpowered isekai protagonist, and it's painfully boring. Not to mention he's doing that hiding my true power thing as terribly as possible and for no discernible reason. The episodes feel like they drag on forever, too. I just can't do it anymore. The slimes are super cute, but I'm not going to sit through a show just for them, and I was also still wishing that they had a little more personality to them as well. But then, after I had watched the episodes, I did a little Googling, and I found out that this light novel series is from the same author as Strongest Sage with the Weakest Crest. And suddenly, the sheer mediocrity of this one made so much more sense. Anime dropped this year, number 24. When will Ayumu make his move? 3 episodes watched, 5 out of 10. If there is one thing that I can say about this show, it's that it's inoffensive. It's just pretty plain and middle of the road, and all that served to do is leave me indifferent to it. I was already feeling a lack of interest in the second episode, but by the end of the third, my feelings were pretty cemented. It's just not grabbing me. And that's a shame, because seeing 2 dumbasses in love is generally my jam. It was what carried me through the weaker moments of love after world domination last season, after all. However, there's just nothing that I'm latching onto here because it's all pretty standard. The titular Ayumu is doing that thing where we can't confess to the person we like until we manage to pull off some kind of big goal. Which, fine, fair enough, whatever, but I've seen it so many times before that it's just not interesting to me anymore. It doesn't help that at the same time the show is making jokes about just how bad both of them are at keeping their feelings a supposed secret, and those jokes aren't all that funny. So when I'm not feeling the romance and I'm not feeling the comedy in a rom-com, there's really not that much left for me there. I kind of went in knowing this one wasn't going to be for me, though. I've sampled a few anime based on this manga author's work, and none of them have ever fully worked for me in any way. I just don't think I mesh with whatever it is they are trying to do. Anime dropped this year, number 25, Prima Doll. 3 episodes watched, 5 out of 10. After how much I loved Violet Evergarden and Vivi, the concept of this show seemed like something that was going to be right up my alley. I think that in another world it could be, but the version we have here just isn't something that hits the right buttons for me, unfortunately. It's not one that I would call outright bad, but at this point, unless I hear something stellar about it down the line, it's one that I'm going to give a pass on. The biggest issue that Prima Doll has is a tone problem. It wants to have those emotional moments that really tug on your heartstrings when you see the effects the war has had on these sentient robots with feelings. But at the same time, it's not capable of giving up the desire to also be a show about cute robot girls working in a cafe together. It ping-pongs between the 2 extremes really quickly, too quickly if you ask me. I think that you could have had them doing the cute work in the cafe, but taken a more down-to-earth tone with it instead, so it's something that's not quite as close to a cute girls doing cute things type of show. I think the art style that was chosen here was also at odds with what they're trying to do. It's using that big bobblehead, look at how cute our characters are kind of a style, but then it tries to put them in war scenarios as well, and suddenly these cute moe blah proportions just don't work anymore. It's once again one of those things that I think a simple adjustment of giving the characters more adult and human proportions could have solved in order to alleviate the issues in tone. The entire time I was watching it, it never got me to feel the emotion I could tell it wanted me to. And the one thought that kept coming to my mind whenever we were just having scenes in the cafe was, this is really damn twee. And all of that is a real shame because this has some beautiful animation and an interesting world that feels like it's getting a bit squandered on the story that's being pulled in two different directions. It feels like a show that's frequently threatening to be more than just cute girls, but can never commit to actually doing that. Anime dropped this year, number 26. Extreme Hearts, 2 episodes watched, 3 out of 10. Oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Let me say right off the bat that I think that even if something is bad, that doesn't mean that you can't find some kind of enjoyment in it. I'm actually in huge agreement with Jello Apocalypse when it comes to rating things, where a positive score indicates an actual enjoyment and a negative score indicates the level of ironic enjoyment. In this case, ironic enjoyment would net this one a -5. I think it can actually be pretty decent to sit back and have a laugh at, but I just don't have time to do that between all the other seasonals right now, hence why I'll be dropping it. Extreme Hearts just has too much going on for it to be enjoyable normally, at least in my opinion. You're free to disagree. Our lead character is a failed singer who has made her debut but not gone anywhere, so her label is dropping her and they recommend that she get involved with this extreme enhanced sports tournament in order to get eyes on her and get her a chance to actually perform in front of everyone watching. It's very much giving me, haha, you're fired, take an application for a fast food job on your way out energy. It begs the question as to why they didn't just promote her more if they think that exposure was the only issue they were having with her. She ends up being joined by her singular superfan and said superfan's neighbor, who join in the middle of the soccer match. So I have to assume that these games have no actual rules either. The opening implies that we're going to pick up 2 more girls along the way for a team of 5 to replace the AI robot players that also just kind of exist in this world. There's also further evidence that we're going to go from a solo artist to an idol group, which is odd since our main character was doing and favors low-key guitar music, not idol pop. The pacing is a bit all over the place too, with more time spent on the training sessions leading up to the competition than is actually spent on the early rounds of the competition, which just skips over about 4 or 5 rounds so that they're gearing up to compete for the finals. I mean, yeah, you could do that, or you could just make it so there were fewer teams and thus fewer rounds so the viewer doesn't feel like they're missing out on vital content, especially when each round was a different sport too, which only further adds to the ludicrous nature of this competition as a whole. Add on the fact that this one looks like it's being made on the cheap and all the characters look kind of dead in the eyes, and you have something that people might enjoy as a so bad it's good kind of series, but I can't see myself seriously watching it anytime soon. Anime dropped this year, number 27. The maid I hired recently is mysterious. 1 episode watched, 3 out of 10. Alright, well, I think I should get it out of the way first that this show never really had much of a chance of winning me over in the first place. There's been a recent spike in this trend of what I've been referring to as teasing shows. I don't know if there's some other specific term that people use, but what I mean by this is things like teasing Master Takagi-san, or Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro, or even arguably this season's Vermeil in Gold. Shows where the whole thing is watching one character poke and prod at the other with romantic undertones. They're just not a type of show that appeals to me, and I've not yet had one that was able to catch my interest. This show is another example of that, but it's made worse by the fact that instead of it being the main character being teased by a classmate, we have a setup that involves a grown woman and a child. Now, their ages are not specified, no, and as far as I can tell from some Googling, their ages have never been specified, actually. But from the character designs, this is what it comes off as while you're watching it. There's no arguing that our male lead is anything but a preteen, as I have seen people peg him as being anywhere from 8 to 12 years old. And the maid is in her late teens at the youngest. But we are shown her working somewhere else before her current place, so she ends up coming off as somewhere in her 20s. Oh, and it's a whole other can of worms that she's shown to be in a uniform buttoned up to her throat in the flashback, but the second she intends to work for a child, she suddenly has a massive window to show off her cleavage. It's, suspect. But beyond those issues with the setup of the whole thing, it's just not a very entertaining show on its own. This started life as a webcomic, and you can really tell because scenes are very short and contained, with the main gag of the show becoming very repetitive even by the end of the first episode. Boy gets suspicious. Maid teases him. He has no filter and just kind of says things. She gets flustered and backs down. Rinse and repeat 3 or 4 times, and you have the episode. That works in a bite-sized webcomic, but not back to back to back in an episode of a show. It's definitely one that would have worked better as a series of shorts or as half-length episodes, because as it is now, it just quickly grows boring and repetitive. Anime dropped this year, number 28, Black Summoner. 2 episodes watched, 4 out of 10. Oh boy, a generic isekai. Let's run down the list. Fantasy world, indistinguishable from 90% of other isekai. Check. Hiding your true power for arbitrary reasons and not actually being all that subtle about it. Check. Main character favored by the gods. Check. Slavery that the main character is completely ambivalent to. Check. The main character's life before being isekai'd is so entirely incidental that they don't even bother to show it to us. Check. That one is almost doubly so because the main character gives up his memories of his prior life in exchange for extra skill points when he's set up in the new world. However, he still seems to remember some things, so what's the point? I understand that there's a difference between memory and knowledge, obviously, but the line between what he's allowed to remember and what he's not is so blurred that just a line or two of explanation would have really helped. Like, sure, I'll buy that he remembers the concept of video games and gamers, but if he's lost all his memories, it's a bit odd that he specifically remembers his nationality and love of baths from his last life. That doesn't feel like general knowledge, but more specific to him, so where's the line? Oh, but he popped off to the goddess about how great he thought she was before he got his mind wiped, so she's along for the ride as one of his summons. He just doesn't have the power to actually summon her yet. He just gets to hear her voice in his head all the time. It's an interesting take, I suppose, but not that interesting. This is also another case of an overpowered main character, and I've said it once and I'll say it again. Not my thing. And yes, he himself is not that powerful, but when his summons get a 100 boost to all stats just because he was the one to summon them, and his summoning is the best in the whole world, he's an overpowered main character, just with caveats to try and make it seem like he's not. I was already feeling like I was going to drop this one, but I gave it a second episode just to be sure, and I'll admit I'm glad I did because I was treated to the glory of this show's CGI. Look, it's not actually that bad. It doesn't rise to the heights of Studio Orange, obviously, but it's pretty decent. The issue is that it stands out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the show, especially with that fight, and just kind of takes me out of it. Give me a good laugh, though. Anime dropped this year, number 29, Engage Kiss. 2 episodes watched, 4 out of 10. This is just kind of one of those shows that's not for me at its core. I don't know what exactly it is that disinterests me since I've seen some of the core concepts in other places and enjoyed them, but looking at the summary of this one at the start of the season, there was part of me that just went, yeah, not interested, and I'm still not entirely sure why. There was something in the vibe that just didn't click with me. I don't know. There are sometimes shows like that where you don't know why it's not for you, it's just not. However, there were still things that I did not like about this one that were layered on top of that base of just not clicking with it. One of those things being a pretty big one, the main character. He's just a total loser and scumbag who is clearly leeching off of everyone around him. I don't enjoy spending time with him in the slightest, which is a problem for your main character to have. Now, I know the common argument is, no, you see, the show is about watching him become a better person. However, I have seen that not actually be carried through enough times that I don't trust that to actually be the case anymore when people say it. Not to mention that this is an anime original, so we don't even have a source material to promise that to us either. Exacerbating this is the fact that you have 2 female leads fighting over him, and I'm left to sit here and wonder, why? For what reason? What does he have to offer either of them? It's not even like he's that charming or some nice guy under it all. In fact, he seems to kind of just disregard their feelings a lot of the time. So I don't even see there being an aspect of emotional fulfillment that would give them reason to want to be with him. I'm always really disappointed when a show sets up two women to be complete and total badasses who have a job to do, and then basically just reduces them to squabbling over a man. Not surprising, though. The show is very clearly geared at a male audience for them to go, but what if they were fighting over me? And I'm not even going to really get into the fact that the fan service in this show is utterly distracting and unneeded. We are having a work conversation. Why is the camera focused on one of the female lead's chests while she's on an exercise bike? I mean, I know why. I just find it dumb. And all of those things that keep me from enjoying the show are a real shame, because there are some really wonderfully done cuts of animation in here from time to time. It's some great work, even if it means that outside of those cuts, occasionally things have to be a little hit and miss. However, it just means that this is going to be one where I catch those great animation cuts later, because I'm not going to sit through everything else this show has for them. I can completely understand this being someone's big, dumb, fun show or guilty pleasure, and if that's what it is for you, I'm happy for you. But that's just not the case for me.